This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. From heating our homes and powering our vehicles to cell phones, clothing, and medical equipment, oil and natural gas makes everyday life better. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Welcome to Plain Talk Live. I'm Rob Port. It's a pretty typical story where you hear about a business, a venture, a startup, or maybe even just an existing business that's expanding, and they want some help from the government to do it. And a lot of times that help comes in the form of an application to a local government, like a city, for some sort of a tax abatement. And there's a lot of different programs for this. Tax increment finance districts are a popular one, but certainly not the only one. There's a lot of different Renaissance zones are another example that's very specific to the state of North Dakota. But eventually, as a practical matter of policy, they all kind of take the same form, which is some sort of a tax abatement, which is to say, maybe they're going to be exempted from property taxes for a certain amount of time, or maybe they're not going to have to pay the sales tax. It really depends on where you're at and what policy is being exploited. But these programs exist. They're very, very common. The thing is, how often, because a lot of times when they're applying for these abatements, they're making promises along the way. There'll be verbal promises maybe made to the news media. Maybe they'll be vocalized at public meetings. A lot of times they're even put right down in writing in their applications for the abatements that they're seeking. And a lot of times these promises have to do with, well, we're going to create a certain amount of jobs, or we're going to generate a certain amount of tax revenue, or we're going to build here or develop this. Promises. And so the question is how often are these promises kept? And also, do our city leaders who are involved in approving these projects, do they go back and even look at them? Now, my guest is Fargo City Commissioner Tony Gehrig. Tony is well known. He's an outspoken critic of the policy of these abatements. He's not a fan of the idea that we're going to give a specific business or a specific entity a tax break in order to generate. He just doesn't think it's a good approach to policy. But however you may feel about Tony's position on that, which frankly I largely share, to me this is a separate issue. This is an accountability question. This is, are we evaluating these policies to make sure that they work? And Tony, what you're telling me in our conversations before the show, and the reason why I booked you for this episode of Plain Talk Live, is you're saying that your community doesn't look at this.
I would say that no community does. Like you said, when somebody applies, it could be FedEx, which is a multi-billion-dollar corporation, or it could be some local company here saying, we're going to hire 3 people at $15 or $20 an hour. Do we ever go back and confirm, based on what they said, if they're actually doing it? Because what we do largely is, if they say they're going to hire, let's say 10 people, and they're going to pay them $20 an hour, and they're going to put $1 million into their business, into their building or whatever, we will give them an incentive. This incentive could be anywhere from $50,000 to $40 million over 25, 30, 40 years, as you see with some of the buildings in downtown Fargo. Do we ever go back and say, did they? 2 years later, 5 years later, 20 years later, do we ever go back and say, did they deliver on the thing they promised to? And if they didn't, then what? We have a thing called in Fargo clawback. We tout this saying, well, if they don't do what they said they were going to do, we're going to claw back a portion of their incentive that meets whatever they promised. So if they only delivered half the jobs, we'll take away half the incentive. Well, to my knowledge, we have literally never done this. I've been in the city commission for 7 years, and that's when really we've been wrapping up these incentives. It has never happened. In fact, a coworker of mine, a colleague of mine, John Strand, leaned over at the last meeting and said, "Did FedEx hire the 45, whatever people said, number of people they said they were going to hire back in 2015 or 2016 when they got a $660,000 incentive, did they actually hire those people? And if they did they pay the $15 to $20 an hour that they were promising to hire these people? And I said, I don't know. So I called my administrators here in Fargo. The administrators are the top employees. And I asked them that simple question. Did they do the thing? And they go, well, we don't know. And I asked them, can you find out? And they told me there's no mechanism for us to find that out. So we tell the taxpayers of Fargo that we are watching this and making sure that they're delivering on the deliverables that they promised they would give us in writing, like you said, Rob, in writing on their application. And there is absolutely no mechanism for us to find that out. We don't want to know.
Let me pause there for a moment. When you say that there's no mechanism to find out, I'm trying to think what do you mean no mechanism? Why can't you just ask them the question? Like send them an email. Right. So isn't that the mechanism? Everybody has email. Send them an email. Hey, did you create these jobs? Can you give us a report? Did you make these investments or whatever the promises they made were? Just say, hey, here's your application. Here are the promises you made. We're just, now that it's, however many years later, we want to circle back with you and say, to me, that's the mechanism. Why does it need to be more complicated than that?
Do we have a right as a government to ask you how many employees you have? I don't know that we do. As a local government, do we have the ability to say, did you hire 45 people or did you hire 10? And what are you paying those employees? Do we have the right to ask that question? I think that we should, if we're giving out of the government trough. Yes, I think we should. But do we? Could they stiff arm us? And we're talking about a company like FedEx, a multi-billion-dollar company, a multinational company. Who do you email? Do you email FedEx? I mean,
well, they have to have a local manager. Obviously, whoever it was that came and stood in front of the Fargo City Commission and asked for money, that person has a name. Maybe start there. And say, if you don't have the answers, could you forward my email to somebody in your company who does? Again, it's just, and as far as it's interesting, the question does the government, in this case is represented by the Fargo City Commission, City of Fargo, do they have a right to ask that question? And I think yes, although there's probably two ways to look at that. As a legal matter, can the City of Fargo compel the information in some way from Fargo? The answer to that is probably no. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I suspect it's probably no. But can the City of Fargo ask as a general matter, and then if they don't get the answer, say, hey, we gave these folks money and now they're not coming clean on what's there? The City of Fargo has a bully pulpit, and I get, you don't want to be perceived as being unfriendly to business. I don't want that perception, but I'm sorry, if you belly up to the government trough, if you will, and ask for some money, that money is going to come with scrutiny, right? That's part of the deal. Like if you don't want that scrutiny, pay your own way.
And as a practical matter, Rob, I agree with you. We should be able to ask very easily. We should be able to email the guy that came to the city commission meeting who's not from here. He's the regional manager of FedEx. That's some dubious guy who probably doesn't care if he answers the email or not. As a practical matter, yes, we should be asking those questions. As a reality, we don't. And why don't we? Because we don't want to know.
So I think what you're about to launch into is what's the political incentive for looking under this particular rock? Because
let's say that they don't deliver on what we said they would deliver to. Now we look at as a city commission, all those people who approved it and patted ourselves in the back and said, what a great job we did. We're creating jobs. And then we didn't create those jobs. Why would we want to look into that? The government doesn't want to know the answer. Yeah. Lie to me, Rob. Lie to me and tell me you're going to create 1,000 jobs. Tell me you're going to create 10,000 jobs. And they're all going to pay $50 an hour. And I will stand on a pulpit and say, look what the government did. Look what a great job we did. We brought FedEx to Fargo. We only gave them a $500,000 or $750,000, and they did all these great things. What a great job we did. Let's find out that they did none of those things.
Well,
they didn't do any of it.
Yeah.
And we should admit that our programs don't work. No commissioner wants to do that. And I'm the commissioner voting against it, looking at the other commissioners going, did you create any jobs? Because you're a commissioner. You're in the government. You didn't create anything. You simply gave away tax dollars.
The the victory lap around these is almost a cliche, right? I mean, it's you approve it, the project's going to go forward. Maybe there's some ceremonial shovels involved. Maybe somebody's got a big pair of scissors and a ribbon, right? I mean, everybody knows what that means. We've all seen that.
In my office, Rob. Right now, I have them in my office. I have a hard hat, I have a shovel, and a huge pair of scissors in my office right now, and I didn't do any of those things. I didn't create a job.
Yeah, so I actually a friend of mine who was a longtime politician. I won't name him because I don't. But I had a whole closet full of ceremonial shovels, right? So I mean that part of it's almost a cliche, but I think there's still value in looking back. And again, I think probably I don't want people listening to this saying, well, it's Port and Gehrig. And Port and Gehrig don't like this stuff to begin with because they're a couple of conservative-minded guys, and this is just them blowing smoke about something they don't like. But here's the thing. Even if you support this policy and you think that every single project the city of Fargo's done, or most of them, or whatever you think this is good policy, this is a good approach, this is something we ought to be doing, even you should want to look under this rock because for no other reason than to say, identify bad actors who might be taking advantage of the city, and maybe the city doesn't need to do business with them in the future. Or maybe to identify a business that really tried and did it the right way and to say, boy, we couldn't meet our goals. Well, then the question is why? And maybe the answer to that is something that can be fixed in terms of city policy. I mean, there's a lot of avenues here. This doesn't just have to be a complaint from critics of the policy. This can also be a complaint from supporters of the policy that say, hey, we want to understand that that this really works. And then maybe, I don't know, heck, if it works, then have another ribbon cutting ceremony and an anniversary of the original. Take another victory lap if it worked, I guess. But we should know if it works. I mean, to me, that's one of the most fundamental things you have to do with public policy. You launch an initiative, and then at some reasonable interval after it's begun, you go back and you look and you say, did this actually help people? Did this actually achieve what we thought it achieved?
Yeah, we've been doing this for 25 years in the city of Fargo. We've been doing it for a very long time. We started
and to your knowledge, in 25 years, nobody's gone back and said, hey, did this actually create jobs?
I'm not aware of anyone that has ever gone back and said, did they produce the jobs? Did they produce the income? Did they produce anything that they said they would produce? I've never seen one report. I've never seen anything. And when I asked for that report to be substantiated, to be made with one of the most high-profile incentives we've ever given, the FedEx incentive that made national news, they all threw their hands there and said, where would we get that from? Why would we have that? Well, I don't know, because we gave away $750,000 to a multi-billion-dollar corporation that was already going to come here. They said at the meeting they were going to come here regardless of the incentive. And we have no substantiating information of if they hired the people they wanted to hire. And so why don't we want to ask these questions? It would ruin the narrative. It would ruin the propaganda. It would ruin every idea that we have of saying, yep, the government creates jobs, therefore we should have more government. And I'm not talking about left or right argument. The biggest quote unquote Republican in the city of Fargo, Dave Pepcorn, is the biggest champion of these incentives. And he's the one who's pushing them bar none 100%. He is the head of that committee. He is the one who says every time at city commission meetings what a great deal this is for Fargo. But he cannot prove one iota of the numbers that he is championing. He's saying that downtown Fargo has tripled in value because of incentives. Well, I'm sorry, but 66% of the businesses downtown have never received an incentive. So how can you say we're growing because of that? The vast majority, 90% of companies in the city of Fargo who are growing and or created in the city of Fargo have never received an incentive. Very, very few people have received incentives in the city of Fargo. And mostly it's the same people over and over again who are getting these things. And you're saying that the city of Fargo is growing because of incentives? That is completely nonsense. And if I'm wrong, produce the documents. They hired this many people at this amount of money per hour. And that's how this is happening. But if you can't produce that, and if you have no mechanism whatsoever to show me that's happening, that throws some massive red flags. And the biggest company to ever come to the city of Fargo, which is Amazon, who's going to create 1,000 jobs at a minimum of $15 an hour with benefits on day one, guess what? Did not ask for incentive. They came here because we're the best company for them. They came here because we have two interstates that run through our city. They came here because we have a massive airport that is doing millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in business every single year. They did not come here for incentive because they didn't even ask for incentive. The reason people are asking for incentives, and I do not blame them, Rob. If you are a company and you want an incentive and you play by the rules and you get the incentive, I'm not blaming you. I'm blaming us for giving them to you because we need to stop doing it.
Yeah.
You will come here regardless. You will go here regardless because we're the best place for you. Not Virginia, not Oregon, not Texas. It's Fargo. The reason you're coming here is because we have jobs, we have people, we have people that want to work, we have great schools, we have great community. And that's the reason you're coming here, not because of a temporary 5-year or 10-year incentive.
It's the same attitude that I had. We've been having this debate about expanded unemployment benefits too, and I've been very careful. Like I don't blame any worker out there who's taking advantage of those benefits. Good on you. It's available. We made them available. As long as they're available, if they feel like it works for you, then take it. But our job is, as a matter of public policy, is to make all of our jobs, from elected officials to obviously taxpayers and voters, it's our job to promote economic policy or any sort of policy that works and that accomplishes the goals that we want to accomplish. So yeah, I don't blame any business, I don't blame any person for taking advantage of a government program that's made available. It's up to us on the political side of things to evaluate these programs and decide whether or not they're working appropriately and achieving the goals that we say that they're going to achieve. And again, you kind of veered off and you made your argument against, which again I largely agree with. You made your argument against this sort of policy, and that's great. But this particular question isn't about let's prove Tony Gehrig right. The question is, we're doing things in terms of this public policy, and we're claiming that there are certain outcomes from these things. So where's the data to back that up, right? And Rob, the data's not on some, carved on some mystical tablets hidden in the bottom of a dungeon where you have to slay a dragon or something to get to it. The data's just there in the business. You can just send them an email and ask the question and then see what they give you back. And I guess hope that they're honest about it, which I don't have any reason to believe that they wouldn't be. But that's what we want. This really isn't a complicated thing to my mind.
Yeah, and let's assume they're not honest. At least they lie to me, Rob. Lie to me. Tell me you did it.
Well, no,
we're not even asking the question. Yeah. And when I ask the question to our city administrator, and by the way, I'm not blaming the employees. I'm blaming us as the policymakers to have no structure in place whatsoever to allow our employees to follow up on what we're doing. Let's make a law. Let's make a policy to say that every 2, 3, 4 years, whatever it is, any reasonable time after they receive the incentive to follow through. If there's someone getting a 25-year incentive in the city of Fargo, and by the way, the longest one in the city of Fargo is 42 years, okay? I'm 37 years old. The longest incentive in Fargo is older than I am, okay? We don't have any mechanism whatsoever to find out if it was successful or not. That's completely crazy. And to set up our employees to have to answer the question when there's no policy set up for it, that's our job to do that.
The really interesting thing is that you mentioned earlier in the interview that there are clawback provisions in this. So that's right. That's obviously a policy that the city commission, both past and present, has thought about and has implemented and has talked about as saying, well, one reason why we can feel confidence in these programs is because we have clawback provisions, so we can go get back what's ours if it's being abused or it's not working or what have you. But to me, the only way you can claw anything back is if you lift the rock and you look under and you say, well, it's not working, right? Or someone didn't satisfy the provisions or what have you. You can't claw anything back if you don't look. So why even have – I mean, it kind of makes it seem like the whole clawback thing was just a canard that was tossed out there to appease critics and not something that anybody was actually taking seriously.
100%. So how do we actually use it? The way we actually use it is immediately after they get the incentive and they give us their they're going to build a building for $1 million. And let's say they told us it was going to be $1 million. And that building ended up being, let's say, $900,000. Then we reduce the incentive, that little 10% amount, to say, well, you were going to get $1 million, now you get $900,000. Sorry, that's what you get. After that, we totally let go. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we have no idea. We don't care because we don't want to know. So we do use it to an extent. Immediately after the incentive is granted, we get your permits and we see what you're actually spending. And it has nothing to do with hiring people. It's nothing to do with what you pay them. There's nothing to do with anything other than the amount of the building you're building. Then we'll adjust whatever we approved to meet that certain amount of money, which is clawback. They can make that argument. But 2 years after that, we don't care who you hired. We don't care if you promised us 20 employees at $30 an hour and you hire 5 employees at $10 an hour. We don't care. We don't want to know, because it makes us look bad, and it makes the government look bad, and it makes our system look bad. It makes our propaganda not work. It makes our narrative not work. And we need to keep this going so that I can pat myself on the back and get reelected for giving you taxpayer dollars when you didn't deserve them. And by the way, we talk about taxpayer dollars. We're talking about city dollars. The vast majority of the dollars we're giving away are from the school board. So I have a son who's in 2nd grade, and that school needs to be fixed, and they need to hire teachers, and we are not hiring teachers at the level we should in the city of Fargo. We're not paying them what they need to be paid. So when we take these dollars away, millions and millions and millions of dollars a year away from the school board, vastly from the school board, that means that they raise their taxes in order to meet this new demand. So we're actually raising taxes on the regular folks, the folks who just want to pay their property taxes and be left the hell alone. We're raising taxes on them while we give money to wealthy developers, whether they're from Fargo or not. We will give you guys money, but everyone here in the city of Fargo, you better pay your taxes, or else we're going to take your house away.
So, and again, one thing that you mentioned is that you didn't feel like anybody's doing this in any community in North Dakota. Now, I will tell you, before this interview, I spent the morning sending some emails to some of North Dakota's largest communities. Grand Forks, Minot, Bismarck, just as a way, I guess, to sort of sample, because I don't know. I had as many years as I've been writing about this stuff, I had never really thought. I guess I had just assumed that at some point there was some sort of a verification process for these claims, and maybe there isn't. So I sent out a question to some of the other communities to find out what are they doing, because I feel like this could be a big statewide story if we've been doing these deals and nobody's looking back at them to see if they're working or not. So I sent those out. But what's your basis for saying that? I mean, have you spoken to people in other communities, and asked them if they do this? I mean, obviously, I assume that you're some sort of intergovernmental panels or discussions or emails or whatever. I mean, what do you base that claim on?
So, number one, this is a statewide story, because would we give an incentive to the city of Fargo? I will answer your question, Rob. Just give me a second. When we give out an incentive, let's say a Renaissance zone exemption, we're not just giving away Fargo's property tax dollars. We're giving away state income tax dollars, right? So we love giving away these things because it doesn't affect us at all. We make the state deal with it. And most of the money we give away, we're only 17%. When we give you 100% exemption on your building, city of Fargo is only 17%. Then it's the park board at 17%. Then it's the county at 17%. And then it's the school board at 51%. And then it's vector control. And then it's the airport. So we're giving away a lot of money that's not ours. And we love doing that because it makes us look really good. Dave Pepcorn can pat himself in the back and say, I created that business. He didn't create a damn thing. Okay. So when I talk to other commissioners in the state, and I say, how are your incentives going? Are they working for you? Am I crazy? Like, it's not working here in Fargo. We're giving away a lot of money, and there's people who are losing their homes and they can't afford to pay their property tax, and we're special assessing people more and more, and we're raising sales taxes, and we're doing all these things. Is it working for the normal person in your community? Because it's not here in Fargo. And they say, I don't know. We don't like our incentives. We don't know if they're working or not. People say they are, but it's really anecdotal. But the fact that if you even email somebody in another state, I don't care if it's Washington, I don't care if it's Williston, I don't care whatever it is. If they can't produce those documents on demand, it means those documents don't exist, and it means they haven't even looked into the issue. This should be a very simple question.
Yeah.
Did they produce the jobs they said they were going to produce at the level they said they were going to produce them? And if not, why? That isn't cosmic. That is not cosmic. That is not something that should be extraordinary. That should be the first question we ask 2 years after the incentive. Did you hire the folks? And are you paying them $20 an hour? And if not, why? And if you aren't, why are we giving you the incentive?
Because we know how government works. If it's something that if there's something that they're looking at, there's a report somewhere. right?
Yes.
Like there's some sort of report. When I want to know more about traffic accidents, when the state starts something like the sober ride program, and we're going to be providing vouchers for people to get rides on a ride sharing service if they've been drinking a little bit, and I want to say, well, what are North Dakota's drunk driving statistics? I know that the Department of Transportation puts out an annual report about that, because
Right.
we're always making policy, traffic safety policy, and the only way to evaluate whether or not that policy is working or not is to go back and say, well, did we have more fatal accidents or less fatal accidents? Did we have more property damage or less property damage? It's the only way to evaluate this policy. So what you're telling me, and I guess I'm on a hunt for questions from at least from some of our biggest communities, is, are we evaluating this policy after the fact, or are we just taking it at face value that it's working because the people who are promoting the policy say it's working?
And Rob, here's the biggest problem. This is not a new program. This has been going on for
Decades.
the majority of your life.
Right.
You're my age. When we were in high school, they were giving away incentives.
Yeah.
And they have never tracked.
Well, Renaissance zone policy, just to name one example, started in the Schaefer administration. In the 90s, early to mid. I guess I don't know at what point in his administration they passed that, but Governor Schaefer was governor from 1992 to 2000.
That's right. 25 years for City of Fargo, we've been doing this, and then pilots came around, and then TIFs came around in a big way, and now in City of Fargo, we're stacking them on top of each other, and we're saying what a great job we're doing. Block 9 got $35 million in incentives. $35 million in incentives. Are we tracking to see if that was a good payoff or not? And by the way, the only reporting I've ever seen on this, and I will give credit to the forum. There was a reporter, to you and Tran, who did a report on the incentives going back 15 years. He did the Radisson. He did a lot of buildings in downtown Fargo. And he said almost none of them met the metrics that they promised they were going to meet. The Radisson in Fargo was one of the biggest incentives in downtown Fargo, in history. And they did not meet the metrics. Did we claw back any money? No, we didn't. In fact, they're still receiving the incentive. It's mind-blowing to me that no one's asked this question before. It's mind-blowing to me that there's no information. It's mind-blowing to me that people are offended when you say, did they meet what they said they were going to meet for this? And if not, why aren't we doing anything? And there's no metric for it whatsoever to claw that money back, which tells me that we don't care. We want to have that win. We want to be able to pat ourselves in the back, and we will be able to tell you that we're creating jobs. Trust us as a government, and let's do more and more of these things so that I can be more and more popular.
Because right now you're talking about what are we going to do about this, and what I hope we do about it is we start looking under this particular rock. But let's talk about you in Fargo, for instance. You're obviously onto this issue now. You're an elected member of the city commission. What can you do? What are you going to do?
For the last 7 years, I've been on the city commission. I want to look at every pilot we've offered. TIFs are easy, and I won't get into the nuts and bolts. TIFs are easy because you pay whatever your property value is worth, and that goes into a little fund for you to pay whatever you want to pay. And I'll get into it if you want to, but TIFs are easy. Pilots and Renaissance zones are very, very different. We give you an X amount of dollars to not pay based on whatever you told us. So we don't really care if you met that metric or not. But for the last 7 years, I am going to demand that we go back 7 years and say, for every pilot we've given, for every payment in lieu of taxes, which means you just don't pay taxes on that property, did they meet whatever they told us? Because like you said, we have a document, and it says, I'm going to hire this many people for this many dollars an hour over the next 10 years. And it draws it all out and shows us exactly what they're going to do. Did they meet those parameters? Did they even get close? If they got close, fine. If they said they're going to hire 10 and they hired 8, all right, I get it. Business is messy. I understand that. If they were going to hire 55 and they hired 10 and at half the value that they were going to pay them, then you don't get the incentive anymore. Your incentive is now gone because you didn't give us nearly what you said you were going to give us.
Yeah. So I think the question is we got to start looking at this stuff. And I think my question for you was, are you going to push for an ordinance or a change in policy that allows us that sets up, because I think what you need really is a process, like whether you're giving an incentive under the pilot program or Renaissance zone or TIF or anything else for that matter, then I think there's got to be a mechanism where somebody gets says, okay, well, within an appropriate time period, we're going to come back and ask these questions. I mean, to me, that's a very obvious, let's create that policy and let's start following it.
The sad thing, Rob, is we already have that policy. We have what's called a tax-exempt review committee in the city of Fargo. There are 2 city commissioners on that committee, Dave Pepcorn and the mayor,
What are they
Tim
doing?
Mahoney.
If nobody's asking this question, what do they do?
They approve incentives. That's all they do. And then they get to say that I improved this incentive.
Okay.
Therefore, I created jobs. Therefore, vote for me. It's Bernie Sanders. It's I will give you money. You then give me money, and then you vote for me. That's how this works. They don't want to deny any kind of incentives. They want to approve as many incentives as possible, so they can say, "Look at me. I built Block 9. Look at me. I brought Amazon to Fargo. Look at me. I built X, Y, or Z." When they didn't do any of those things. So it's using government dollars, it's using public dollars to say, look how great I am because I created jobs, which those aren't happening. The jobs that are being created are vastly coming from the private sector, the free market, for people who aren't getting the incentives. But we don't want to talk about those ones. We want to talk about the ones that we create, so-called we create. So this tax-exempt review committee is supposed to review these things. They are supposed to have a policy in place to review and claw back. They are the ones that came up with the term clawback. That was not in the lexicon 10 years ago, but they said we're going to do that now, but they haven't been doing that, and they don't have a mechanism to do that.
Yeah.
So it's a complete farce. It's more and more big government. It's more and more people patting themselves on the back and saying we created this with no real evidence.
It seems to me if the champions of these sorts of programs are right, and they've been a success, it seems to me that what this represents is a real opportunity for them to show us all just how right that they are. I will see the data hopefully when it comes out. But Tony, I appreciate you coming on with me and talking about this. This is interesting. I'm going to be looking at this. Obviously, have your answer about what's going on in Fargo. I would like to understand maybe what's going on in some of North Dakota's other largest communities. And I don't think we've heard the last of this. But I appreciate you coming on and helping shed some light on this.
Trust me, Rob. This is a new thing that's happening in Fargo, and I will not let this go. With the last few meetings, we've approved a lot of incentives, and every time I talk about how they're hurting the regular person, I get bombarded by the other commissioners talking about what a great job these things have done and how they've tripled the value of Fargo. I want to see the numbers as bad as anybody does. I will not let go of this. This is my new jihad, if you will. I'm going to find out these numbers. I'm going to get this happening. And if they don't, that is one more example of why these things are a terrible deal, not only for people of Fargo, but people of North Dakota.
Tony, thanks.